Joining me from Massachusetts is David Ropeik. He's an international consultant, the author of the book, How Risky Is It Really? Why Our Fears Don't Always Match the Fact. And David, that is a perfect first question for you. Why don't our fears match facts?
We don't just use the facts to figure out what to be afraid of. We more use a system of psychological characteristics about the facts to judge how they feel. The definition of the word risk, in fact, in a dictionary is the chance of something bad happening. Think about those two components: chance, the chance that something happens. That's the odds, the facts, the measurability. Something bad happening is a feeling. Bad is subjective. So how risky something feels is the question, and that is not a simply factual question.
But we've survived as a species for an awfully long time. We must be getting something right.
Well, thank you for the kudos for the system. Absolutely. We have survived so far, and it worked very well when the risks were simpler. No doubt we made some mistakes in the past as well, but mostly it's worked. Here we are down evolution's gauntlet. But the risks we faced before weren't trade-offs between solar power or nuclear power for climate change. They weren't, are chemicals dangerous or not? They were simply, is there something we can't see? Is that dangerous? That was dangerous when it was lions and tigers and bears. Now, when it's chemicals or radiation or GMOs, that uncertainty still scares us, but the risk scientifically is more complex. So the system we're working with is out of date. Hasn't caught up to the complexities of the modern risks we face.
Excuse me, what systems are we working with? Can you just describe that for me?
Yeah, please, let's do. So let's start with the fact that we're not as smart as we think we are. We are still mostly biological animals. And most of our cognition, our conscious cognition, is an after-the-fact awareness of what our biology has already started doing.
Hang on, I'm sorry, I need you to rewind there because that is a stunning statement. You're saying that what we perceive as consciousness has actually already happened. Our body's already taken the leap. Is that in all things, or is that particularly in risk?
Well, it's in all things. And for this, I highly commend a book called Behave, Humans at Their Best and Worst by Robert Sapolsky. Hardly a page turner, but entertaining chapter by chapter. And it's about how biologically we respond to stimuli. And then when the brain becomes aware of how our body is responding to those stimuli, it translates that into consciousness. Let me be very specific here with risk. When you see, let's say you see a snake on the ground, okay, that visual information goes to a part of the brain called the thalamus, which is right on top of the brain stem where your spine enters your skull. The thalamus relays it to a number of areas without processing it into awareness. Two of those areas are the prefrontal cortex here behind the forehead, where we think about things and make executive decisions and careful choices about them. And the other area is called the amygdala, which is much closer to the thalamus. And the amygdala is where our fight or flight or freeze response begins. So what happens when the snake stimulus comes in, and this could be a smell or a sound or anything, it goes to the thalamus, which relays it to the thinking area and the amygdala instinctive area. Well, it gets to the instinctive area first, and the instinctive area does not wait for a risk analysis from behind your forehead. It says, jump out of the way, it could be a snake. So what happens is your body, before you're conscious of any of this, raises your heart rate, changes your vision, changes all your muscles, changes your digestive system, all of those things that are part of an instinctive fear response. We're not conscious of any of this yet. What happens then is your brain says, oh, my heart is racing, and all those other changes have happened. I know what that means. I'm afraid. You see, consciousness follows the biology.
So your brain is trying to interpret what your body's already feeling.
Correct.
Is that what you're saying?
Well,
Yeah.
don't say feeling, because feeling sounds like emotions. What your body is already biologically doing, your brain is interpreting those signals. Exactly right. So, but then the other part that's the part that's important here is, you might say, well, of course we do have this rational brain. We can then think about things. And this takes just a moment for consciousness to arise of the snake. However, in the evolutionary wiring of the brain, we are still set up to react instinctively and emotionally more, and with reason less. And there are two reasons for this biologically. One is it takes longer to think. And if it's a snake and you don't jump out of the way right away, you're dead. That way of doing risk perception gets weeded out of evolutionary adaptive traits. But the other reason is this: it takes calories to process information in the brain. The brain is the calorically hungriest organ in the body. It uses 25% of our calories just sitting here. And back when we were evolving, when we didn't know where the next Sainsbury was, or whether there would be food around the corner, the brain learned all sorts of tricks to cut corners to come up with decisions without having to think too much, because it takes calories to think. And so the wiring of the brain, even still today, gives much more preference to quick emotional decision-making than rational thought. That's an awful lot of biological baggage that's still in the way of making rational choices about risk.
And what happens when emotion comes in? Because you've described, a system that happens anyway. When you add emotion to that.
Well, this is all then a dynamic positive feedback loop. So, for example, I'm walking through the woods and I see a curvy line on the ground and I jump back, or I startle and freeze. Then consciously I'm aware that I'm afraid. Then I become consciously aware that I've walked this trail all the time and I remember that route. It's not a snake. And I respond to my emotion by checking myself. Or in many cases, COVID, for example. Oh no, there's something around. It's new, which means I don't understand it, which means I don't have the information I need to protect myself. And that lack of control makes it scarier instinctively, psychologically. And that setting off the fight or flight or freeze response, a stress response, then makes me less able to be rational about anything that comes after it, because the poison of all of the cortisol and the stress hormones set me up to be more alert to other risks, but less rational about them. So I'm on alert. It changes the body's chemistry. So it depends on what the emotion is. If the emotion is more worry, one of the things that it does is it challenges even further our ability to be rational about the information we're dealing with.
And I'd like to come on, because there are a series of factors that influence whether we overestimate risk or underestimate it. Could you just run me through a couple of them? There's some things we react to more than others.
Yes, thank you. I've been running on about the first part, the brain biology, which is fundamental. But then the question becomes, what are the shortcuts the brain uses to make its quick decisions, emotional or subjective decisions? So let me go down several of them. This, by the way, is the work of Paul Slovic and Baruch Fishoff.
We have Paul Slovic is going to be on our panel. So,
oh, marvelous. Yeah. He is the guru in all of this. And I am deeply humbled by his support in my proselytizing the knowledge that he has developed as an academic. A lot of academics are a little bit more jealous about the information and think they're the ones who should be the prophets of it. Paul's been very supportive, and I'm very grateful. And he's a terrific human being. So what he and Baruch and others have found are a series of psychological characteristics that make some things scarier than others. And I've already mentioned one. If it's new, it's scarier. And it's scarier because we don't understand it fully, which leaves us feeling powerless to know what we need to know to protect ourselves. But let's extend that. There's also an uncertainty to any risk that we can't see or smell or detect. Well, there are a lot of things that we're afraid of in society. Chemicals, which really means industrial chemicals, because after all, we're made of chemicals, and so are apples and oranges. Chemicals, radiation, vaccines, genetically modified food, anything where we can't detect the toxic agent ourselves leaves us feeling like we don't know how to protect ourselves. So a second factor is uncertainty. A third one that's related is control. Do I physically control the circumstances? If so, I'll be less afraid. If I don't physically control the circumstances, I'll be more afraid. And the classic example of this is you're driving down the M1 and you get a little bit sleepy and you switch with the passenger next to you. And now you're in the passenger seat and you don't go right back to sleep, which you were when you were driving, right? Your foot goes to the imaginary brake pedal and your hips are trying to steer the car because you're not in control. It's literally this control factor trying to make your body do dumb things. Let me give a couple others. Brexit there, Trump here, trust. The more we trust the people who are talking to us about a risk and whether we're safe or not, the more influence what they say will have on whether we're more afraid or not. So Trump says, don't worry, but most of us don't trust him. That makes the fear worse. Or Boris Johnson. Trust also accrues to who creates the risk. If we like the company that makes that risky product, the Apple iPhone, we won't be as afraid of cell phone radiation. We trust the source of the risk. Would you trust the competence of the people who are supposed to protect us? The National Health Service there, doctors here. Dr. Fauci in the United States is getting a great deal of trust. The trust in Fauci shapes how afraid we are of COVID. We don't understand the science that he's talking about. There are a couple other factors. In the UK and here and around the world, we're more afraid of cancer than we are of heart disease. That's because of a factor that Paul and Baruch and others call dread, and which I call pain and suffering. Or even more simplistically, how awful would the experience be, of dying that way? So think of it this way. You can either be eaten alive by a shark or die of heart disease, but you have to die tomorrow, and you have to choose one or the other. Which, Saira, would you choose? Let me interrupt myself and ask you a question.
Probably heart disease.
Probably heart disease. Now, so let me change the question two ways. You can either burn to death or die of heart disease. Flames or heart disease? Which do you choose?
Maybe heart disease.
And now let me be emotionally raw, because we've all had experience with cancer in our families, and it's awful. If you had to die tomorrow of either cancer or heart disease, which way would you choose to die?
Oh, I probably heart disease. I mean, although that's horrible too, but yeah, probably. Yeah.
And 10% more of us in the developed world die of heart disease than cancer. So that's not rational. So what you're going on with all three of those questions, and by the way, your answers are common, is you would prefer to die in a way that seems less painful, less suffering, less dreadful, to get back to Paul's language. You see?
Yeah.
You see? So it has nothing to do with the facts. It has nothing to do with the odds of how likely you are to die. Many people say, oh, we should be afraid of things commensurate with the actual statistical likelihood. No, it's the nature of how you die. And I could go on with this, and I won't. But you can see there are a series of emotional characteristics that make the facts feel a certain way.
Yes, I see that. And that kind of brings us very neatly to, here we all are, presumably in our living rooms or our offices, home offices or wherever. In a way, we're all in the same boat. But because of COVID, societies have sort of changed on a dime. What are your thoughts about that in general? I mean, are there factors here that you recognize from your work on risk, the way that we're reacting to COVID?
Well, there are a number of them. So let's start back from the beginning of the pandemic. March, April, the first lockdowns. There was huge, acute fear of this disease. I mean, we were bunkered in. Yeah. I presume the same thing happened in the UK as happened here. There was a run on, we call it toilet paper. What is it, lav paper there?
Toilet paper, yeah.
Okay. You know what that is? That's a manifestation of wanting to do something to give yourself a sense of control. Not against, you're going to wrap your mouth around with toilet paper, but you're doing something. In this country where they're crazy for guns, there was a run on buying guns, as there always is when there's anything scary that happens, because something to protect you in your hands gives you a sense of control. You're not going to shoot the virus,
Yeah.
but it's the feeling of control. And that was because the fear of the disease was higher at the beginning because it was new, which we've talked about. Then, however, sequestered in our lives, having lost control over our own freedom, remember that importance of control, that and the loss of physical contact with people, which we social animals are also programmed to need, starts to weigh against the fear of the disease. As the disease becomes a little more familiar and the price of the quarantine goes up, our fear teeter-totter starts to go the other way. And that's where we are now, or what has led to this second wave, right? We got more relaxed. We met with people. We went out and about. We did all the things that we didn't do at the beginning to stave it off. And then we did because our feelings changed. So it's really been a classic example of the dynamism of risk perception. And let me add one other factor. As I alluded to, social human animals are programmed to need contact with one another. We rely on each other for our own safety. I will put on a mask and sacrifice some of my freedom for you as long as I know that you're doing it for me, because that social altruism not only works for you, but it works for me. Okay, so that social altruism is part of what's going on. But when we don't have contact with one another, that causes stress. Physiological fight or flight response chemistry changes. And that stress exacerbates our alarmism, turns up and down healthy systems, like our immune system gets turned down. When we're quarantined, our immune system gets turned down because we don't have contact with other people. Goodness, that's what we need to fight off the disease. So that's a lot of what's going on.
So I've just got a couple more questions. One is, can you contrast the way we're reacting to COVID with, for instance, a threat like climate change? And is there anything that your knowledge of risk assessment brings to that table?
Brilliant. There's been a lot of study of the risk perception of climate change, and I've written about it for the last several years. It's only recently that research and my writing and others' writing has caught the policymakers' eye. Let me ask you, Sarah, do you live on the coast anywhere?
No.
Okay. So can you name for me one way that climate change will seriously threaten your health and safety in the next 5 years? Really in your gut. I'm not talking about the price of lift tickets at a ski run. I mean, really make you feel personally unsafe.
Well, where I spend a lot of my time in rural France, our water comes from a small stream, which is drying up already much longer in the
there
summer
you are.
than it used to.
Okay, so that's
we
real.
See it by the fact that we don't have enough water to drink in the summer.
That's real, and that's now, and that's personal. And when you ask most people who believe that climate change is happening in the US, there's still this argument. It's around the political tribalism of we believe, we don't believe. If you ask most of the people, 60-some% of whom in the United States believe the human-caused climate change is happening, how worried you are. They say, oh, we're very worried. And then you ask them in order, who is it going to affect? And the very lowest category is me. And what happens when a risk doesn't threaten me? It's almost instinctive. You just don't care as much. So all of the campaigning that environmentalists have done about polar bears and abstract things like icebergs and those poor people in the developing world doesn't make the me at home fear. And that significantly has impeded the public pressure on government to do what's really needed with climate change. That's one key example. The other problem with climate change is we still, only until recently, are we getting to thinking that it's happening now. We mostly still think it's now in the future. It's Greta Thunberg's generation. No, I'll be gone by then. I have kids, but I'll be gone by then. So a later risk scares us less than a risk now.
That does explain why the younger generation are really picking up on climate change.
Of course.
Yeah.
It feels much more personal to them. So you can see those dynamics. And I must say that finally, both the physical circumstances and the wisdom of the campaigners are starting to grab onto this emotional language to try and up public pressure on the issue.
And then just for my last question, just moving away from climate change and any specific risk, but just about our way as individuals and as societies, but particularly as individuals, we face risk. We have to assess threats every single day of our lives. You've very clearly made the point that we don't always make sound decisions. How can we improve?
The very best advice I've gotten from Paul and Daniel Kahneman, one of the leaders in the study of cognitive science and the author of Thinking Fast and Slow, another book I highly commend, is to stop whenever you're making any but choice of risk. You're about to jaywalk across the street. You're about to walk down slippery stairs just out of the shower. I mean, mundane stuff. Not thinking about climate change or something that high and abstract. Stop. Your brain wants to do it fast and easy, lazy, less calories, on instinct, on emotion. Give facts and reason and your ability to be a rational, critical thinker more of a say, literally by delaying the knee-jerk reaction you want to go to first. I mean, just for a moment, or a minute or two, or if you have more time, then go online and get information from trustworthy sources, not just ones that reaffirm what you already believe. Delay the way the brain would prefer to do it, which is more based on instinct and emotion than reason. And you'll therefore give reason more of a say. Now, having said that, knowing this, teaching this, writing this, mea culpa, I screw up all the time.